What if I told you there's something more addictive than heroin, and you're carrying it in your pocket right now? It doesn't come in a needle or a pill. It doesn't need a dealer. It doesn't leave track marks or slurred speech, but it does quietly rewire your brain, rob you of your purpose, and leave you craving more every single day. The craziest part? Society barely even sees it as a problem. Here's the truth. Lust has become the most invisible and accepted addiction of our time. Scroll, click, watch, repeat. You think you're in control, but are you really? Why do millions of people feel empty right after chasing that same desire again and again? Why does it always feel like this time it'll be satisfying, but it never does? This is not about judging you. This is about exposing the trap you didn't even know you were in. Because unlike drugs, lust doesn't just hijack your mind. It invades your heart, your identity, and your soul. It turns you from a creator into a consumer, from a lover into an addict. And it does it so subtly you'll think it's normal. But here's where it gets interesting. If something can hijack your brain this deeply, then what happens when you finally break free from it? By the end of this video, you won't just understand how lust works. You'll discover how to take back control. Not with guilt, not with willpower alone, but with truth. The kind that sets people free. So before you swipe away, ask yourself, what would your life look like without this invisible chain around your neck? Let's find out. Imagine your brain as a control center, with a reward system designed to keep you alive, motivating you to eat, connect, love, and grow. But what happens when that reward system gets hijacked? Every time you experience pleasure, whether it's from eating chocolate, hearing a compliment, or winning a game, your brain releases dopamine, the feel-good chemical. It's how the brain rewards behavior it wants to repeat. But here's where it gets dangerous. Both lust and hard drugs trigger unnaturally high dopamine levels, far beyond what everyday life offers. That's why both feel so powerful, and why both can become trapped. When someone watches explicit content, the brain gets hit with a massive dopamine spike, similar to what happens with cocaine or meth. The difference? You don't need to break the law to access it. There's no dealer, no cost, just a screen. That makes the cycle even harder to break because the brain starts to crave that instant hit over real-life experiences. The mind begins chasing what's quick, easy, and guaranteed. This is the instant gratification loop. Unlike building a real relationship or achieving a meaningful goal, lust gives you a quick high with no effort. The brain starts to prefer shortcuts over real effort. Over time, normal life starts to feel dull, and the only thing that seems exciting anymore is that next hit. And then comes the most dangerous part, the rewiring. The more you feed lust, the more your brain rewires its reward system to expect that artificial high. It's not just about pleasure anymore, it becomes a default setting. You begin to think this is just who I am. But it's not. It's who your brain has been trained to become. This isn't a weakness, it's science. And once you understand that your brain has been hacked, you can begin to rewire it the other way. That's the good news. Just as the brain can fall into addiction, it can also heal. But that healing starts by first realizing what's really going on inside your mind, and why the temporary high is never worth the permanent cost. Understanding this isn't just about knowledge. It's about reclaiming your power. There's a reason this generation is more addicted to lust than any before it. And it's not because people have suddenly become weaker. It's because temptation has become limitless. Think about it. With just a few taps on a screen, anyone can access more explicit content in one night than someone could have seen in an entire lifetime just a few decades ago. There's no need to wait, no need to pay, no awkward interactions or shady environment. It's a digital drug, served instantly and silently. Unlike traditional addictions, alcohol, cigarettes, or narcotics, there are no legal risks, no financial barriers, and barely any social consequences. No one gets arrested for watching a video. You don't need to sneak into a bar or buy something off the street. In fact, it's so common that society barely even blinks at it anymore. It's become normalized to the point where speaking against it almost feels radical. And here's where it gets more dangerous. Kids are getting exposed to it long before they're emotionally or mentally ready. One accidental click, one curious search, and suddenly a 13-year-old is caught in a cycle their brain isn't even developed enough to handle. What starts as curiosity quickly becomes a secret obsession, and since there's no external damage people can see, no bruises, no behavior outbursts, it stays hidden and festers. The scariest part, There's no end to it. Unlike a bottle that empties or a pill that runs out, the internet offers an infinite scroll. There's always a new video, a new face, a new fantasy. And the more you consume, the more desensitized you become, needing more extreme content to feel the same level of stimulation. It's a bottomless pit that convinces you there's always something better one click away. This is not just entertainment, it's engineering. Algorithms are designed to keep you hooked, to feed you exactly what your brain is craving, even before you know it. You're not just a user, you're a product being manipulated. Breaking free from this trap starts with awareness. You're not weak, you're targeted. And once you realize that this system is built to enslave your attention, you can finally begin to take that power back. You can't smell it on someone's breath. You won't see needle marks or bloodshot eyes. No one stumbles or slurs their words after a hit of lust. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous. It hides in plain sight. Because it's not a substance you can touch, it rarely gets treated like a real addiction. Society often laughs it off, brushes it aside, or worse, celebrates it as freedom. But underneath that surface lies a powerful force shaping how people think, feel, and live. Just because it doesn't show up on a drug test doesn't mean it isn't consuming someone from the inside out. Unlike substances that leave physical traces, lust addiction works silently. It reshapes your thought patterns, your focus, your priorities. It doesn't destroy your liver, it rewires your desires. People struggling with it still go to school, work, even church. They seem fine on the outside, but inside they're caught in a mental loop that's hard to explain and even harder to escape. Over time it shifts from pleasure to need. What started as something exciting becomes something you can't stop. You're no longer chasing a thrill, you're trying to fill a growing emptiness. The content gets more intense. The guilt grows stronger, but the brain keeps begging for more. Not because it wants joy, but because it now needs relief. This psychological grip runs deeper than most people realize. It creates cravings, not for connection, but for escape. It rewrites what you see when you look at others, not as souls, but as objects. It breaks intimacy before it even begins. Relationships suffer, focus disappears, and self-worth slowly crumbles. And since the world doesn't treat it like a real problem, many people suffer in silence. They convince themselves it's just a phase, that they can stop whenever they want, that it's not hurting anyone, but deep down, they know something isn't right. Understanding the invisible nature of this addiction is the first step toward freedom. You don't need to wait for your life to fall apart before you get help. You don't need bruises to prove you're bleeding inside. Recognizing the silent control is how you begin to break it. Because what controls your mind controls your life, and you were never meant to be controlled. There's nothing wrong with desire. In fact, it was designed by God Himself. The longing for love, connection, and intimacy is woven into the human soul. But like any powerful gift, when twisted, it can become a weapon against you. Lust doesn't create something new. It hijacks what's already there. It takes a beautiful sacred longing and distorts it into something shallow, selfish, and destructive. What was meant to draw us closer to another person in love is now used to isolate us in fantasy. It promises intimacy but delivers emptiness. The danger lies in how subtle it all begins. You start craving connection, but instead of finding it through vulnerability or love, lust offers a shortcut. No commitment, no rejection, no waiting. Just pleasure. But it's a lie, because there's no relationship, only consumption. It trains the mind to view people not as souls but as objects. Not as partners, but as products. Over time, this distortion goes deeper. You begin to identify with your craving. Your sense of worth, confidence, even masculinity or femininity becomes tied to how much you consume, how attractive you feel, or how much attention you get. You don't just desire, it starts to define you. This is where lust becomes more than a behavior. It becomes an identity. And once that happens, real love becomes harder to recognize. Real relationships begin to feel boring. Commitment starts to look like a burden. Why pursue someone's heart when you can get 1,000 versions of fake connection with a few clicks? But here's the truth. Your desire was never the problem. You were made for connection. You were made for love. Lust didn't give you that. It stole it from you. And every time it feeds your cravings, it buries the real you deeper beneath the noise. Healing doesn't mean shutting off your desire. It means reclaiming it. Redirecting it back to its original purpose, to connect, to love, to give, not just to take. Because when you understand that your desire was never meant to enslave you, You'll stop letting lust define who you are. You were never made to chase shadow. You were made for something real. It always starts with a whisper, just this once. But once it turns into again, and again, and soon, it's not just about the habit, it's about hiding it. The most dangerous part of lust isn't the act itself, it's what follows. That sinking feeling right after, the guilt, the shame, the voice that says you're disgusting. You'll never change. That voice doesn't just stay in your head, it starts shaping your heart. You feel distant, not just from others but from God, from yourself. Like something pure inside you has been covered in dirt. The weight of this guilt drives people into silence. No one wants to be judged. No one wants to be labeled. So instead of opening up, we put on a mask. Smile in public. Act normal. Pretend it's all under control. But deep down, there's a war raging, and no one knows about it. The shame builds, and with it, isolation grows. You start pulling away from the very people who could help you heal. And the more you hide, the harder it becomes to stop. Secrecy gives the addiction power. It becomes a private world where no one else is allowed in. Even the idea of confessing or seeking help feels terrifying. What will they think of me? That fear keeps you locked in the cycle. Not just addicted but alone. This double life eats away at your identity. One version of you goes through the motions, working, studying, showing up for family. But behind the mask is someone tired, ashamed, and exhausted from pretending. This constant split drains your energy and kills your joy. You weren't made to live in fragments. Here's the truth most people never hear. You're not alone, and you're not broken beyond repair. The shame you feel is not a sign of defeat. It's a signal that your soul is still alive and longing for freedom. But healing can't begin in the dark. It starts in the light. Real strength isn't in hiding your struggle. It's in having the courage to face it. When you drop the mask, when you speak the truth, you weaken the very thing that's been controlling you. You don't have to be perfect to be free. You just have to stop pretending. It doesn't happen overnight. That's what makes it so deceptive. One click here, one scroll there, and before you know it, something deep inside begins to shift. What once felt harmless becomes a slow erosion of everything that truly matters. It starts with your relationships. At first you think it won't affect them, but it always does. Lust creates unrealistic expectations. Perfect bodies, instant pleasure, no emotional effort. So when real relationships enter the picture, they suddenly feel underwhelming. You begin comparing your partner to a fantasy that was never real to begin with. Intimacy becomes performance. Connection turns into disappointment. Trust begins to fade. Over time, couples stop talking, stop touching, stop seeing each other. And what started as a private habit slowly becomes the reason two people drift apart. But it doesn't stop there. Lust doesn't just damage your heart, it clouds your mind. It numbs your focus and drains your motivation. That fire you once had for purpose, for growth, for creating something meaningful, starts to dim. You can't build a future when your mind is constantly pulled back into fantasy. Hours are wasted. Goals are delayed. And deep down a quiet voice begins to ask, what am I even doing with my life? And perhaps the most dangerous part, your brain gets retrained. It stops seeking joy in real moments. Real love takes time. Real success takes effort. Lust offers shortcuts, so the brain learns to chase what's fast, not what's fulfilling. It starts craving artificial pleasure instead of genuine connection. And the more this happens, the harder it becomes to enjoy the simple, beautiful parts of life. Friendships, family, faith, they all start to feel dull compared to the constant stimulation of fantasy. This rewiring can steal years. It convinces people to settle for empty highs. Instead of chasing deep purpose, it turns creators into consumers, leaders into wanderers, lovers into addicts. But here's the hope. The brain can be rewired again. The damage isn't final, unless you let it be. The key is recognizing what's being stolen before it's too late, because your purpose is bigger than pixels, and real connection, though harder, is always worth the fight. Walk into any church or faith-based recovery meeting, and you'll likely hear about the dangers of alcohol, drugs, and addiction. But there's one struggle that rarely makes it to the pulpit, even though it's quietly wrecking more lives than we can count. It's the silent battle no one wants to name. Not because it's harmless, but because it's uncomfortable, it's personal, it's hidden, and because it doesn't come with the outward destruction that drugs often bring. It slips under the radar, even in spiritual spaces. But make no mistake, its impact runs just as deep, if not deeper. The Bible doesn't shy away from this topic. In fact, it speaks more about sexual sin than almost any other moral issue. Not because God is against desire, but because he knows how easily desire, when distorted, can lead to destruction. Flee from sexual immorality. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 6:18, warning that this sin is different because it's against our own body, our own soul. Jesus took it even further. Anyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in his heart. This isn't casual language. It's serious. It's urgent. But the modern church often avoids going that deep, maybe out of fear of shame, maybe out of discomfort. And as a result, countless believers are left struggling in silence, thinking they're alone in their battle, wondering why their spiritual life feels numb, even though they're doing everything else right. That numbness has a name. It's the voice of the Holy Spirit being silenced. Lust doesn't just damage the body, it clouds the spirit. It dulls conviction. It makes prayer feel distant, worship feel empty, and scripture feel dry. Not because God has moved, but because we've let something else take his place on the throne of our hearts. And here's the truth no one talks about. Spiritual power and secret sin can't coexist for long. One will always push out the other. Lust doesn't just hurt your moral record. It separates you from the presence of the one who gives life, peace, and purpose. But exposure is the beginning of healing. God never shames. He restores. And when you bring this battle into the light, the silence breaks. The Holy Spirit speaks again, and what once felt dead inside begins to breathe again. You can block the websites, delete the apps, throw away the phone, and still fall. That's because this isn't just a behavior problem. It runs much deeper than that. Lust doesn't just live in your habits. It hides in your heart. At its core, this is a spiritual war, one that doesn't just target your actions, but your identity. It's not just about what you're doing in secret. It's about who you're becoming in silence. Lust attacks the very part of you created for love, connection, and purpose. And while science can explain the chemical effects on the brain, it can't measure the damage done to the soul. Because it's not just about dopamine. It's about disconnection from God, from truth, from the version of you that was made to walk in purity, clarity, and power. Every time lust takes control, something inside dims your joy, your spiritual hunger, your boldness. Prayer starts to feel pointless. Conviction gets quieter. Worship becomes hollow. That's not coincidence. That's the spiritual cost. And this is why willpower alone will never be enough. Lust is stronger than your self-control. It doesn't respond to discipline like other habits. You can't grind your way out of it. You have to surrender, not in weakness, but in faith. Victory begins when you stop trying to fight it alone. When you fall on your knees and say, God, I can't do this without you. That's when transformation starts. Not through shame, not through fear, but through grace. God doesn't just want to help you resist sin. He wants to remove its power over you. But that only happens when you invite him into the battle. This kind of freedom isn't achieved. It's received. The world will offer you filters and routines. But what you need is a new heart. One that desires purity more than pleasure. One that craves presence over performance. So stop asking, how strong can I be? And start asking, how surrendered can I become? Because the fight for your purity isn't just about resisting lust. It's about reclaiming your soul. And when you finally stop carrying this weight alone, you'll realize the strength you were missing was never yours to begin with. You weren't made to live enslaved by the very desires that were meant to lead you into love, purpose, and connection. Lust may come wrapped in pleasure, but underneath it's a slow thief stealing your time, your focus, your joy, and your relationship with God. It promises satisfaction, but leaves behind a deeper hunger. It offers escape, but leads to bondage. And while the world tells you it's harmless, harmless things don't destroy hearts in silence. If you felt stuck in this cycle, know this. You're not broken. You're not dirty. You're not too far gone. You're a human being, fighting a real battle. A battle that's not just about behavior, but about your identity. And the fact that you feel the weight of this means your heart is still alive. It hasn't given up. That matters. Healing begins with honesty. It begins when you stop numbing the pain and start listening to it. That inner ache you feel, that's not a weakness. That's your soul calling you home, to clarity, to connect, to God. He's not waiting to punish you. He's waiting to restore you. This isn't about being perfect. It's about being free. And freedom isn't found in filters or willpower alone. It's found when you finally surrender, when you stop carrying the battle alone and invite God into the places you've been hiding. You were made for more than this. You were made for real intimacy, real power, and a life that isn't ruled by shame or secrets. You were made to walk boldly in your purpose, with a clear mind and an unshaken spirit. Lust may have written some chapters of your story, but it doesn't get to write the ending. So let today be the day you draw the line, not with guilt, but with grace, not by striving harder, but by surrendering deeper. Because when you bring what's been hidden into the light, healing begins and freedom follows.